Hello, hello. Anybody there?
Jamie,
Hey, there we go.
there we are. I'm here. My apologies. I had the wrong link for some
No, you're.
reason. It kept going to my default Google
Oh,
talk
I see.
page,
Oh no.
rather than
That's my fault for making things Google. I think I should join the crowd and go with Zoom. That's what everyone's doing these days.
yeah. Well, I've discovered the miracle of StreamYard.
Ooh, yeah, yeah. I'll have to chat with you about that here in a little bit, but I'm really excited to get to talk to you, and it's really great to meet you. It's
Same here.
I know this has been a long time coming, but do you mind if we get the ball rolling?
Let's do it.
All right. So thanks again for your time, for this opportunity to get to know you a little bit. Do you mind if we start at the beginning and get to talk about your love of your work?
Oh, not at all. Lead the way. I'm here.
All right, all right. So tell me where you're from. Tell me what got you into making art.
Um, my parents are from Puerto Rico, and so I'm like first generation mainland. They spoke English, but English was a second language for them. So for me, I ended up learning how to read English through my older brother's stack of comic books.
Mm.
And so I would sneak into his room, grab comics, and read them as best I could. Sometimes I'd sit on my father's lap and he'd read them to me, and we'd kind of work out the words and the pictures together. And that just pretty much crystallized like a love for comics and for that medium, and just for that nature of communication that's more than just, the written word. And so very quickly I discovered a facility for like drawing and for, playing with Play-Doh and clay. And, I was fortunate in that my parents and then the teachers recognized that facility and kind of kept nudging it and giving me opportunities to, display my little dinosaur dioramas for parent teacher night, that sort of thing.
So, did that eventually make its way to wanting to do comic books themselves? Was there a point where you realized that that's something that you wanted to be a part of, or do you enjoy those as a spectator, as more of a reader of comic books?
Oh, I wanted that was my goal from day one to immediately like I would get in trouble at school often because rather than taking notes, I would slide a blank sheet of paper underneath my textbook and just draw out little stick figure comics, but I would do them kind of almost in reverse because I would start at the bottom left corner and then just keep the adventure going across the bottom and then pull the paper down under from the textbook a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit more until I filled up the whole sheet, and then
yeah.
I had to hide it in my textbook and I'd start again.
That's
So
awesome.
all of my school textbooks were just filled rather than notes with this little stick figure theater of just crazy stick figures doing things, and then it just kept going from there.
So it felt pretty organic to you to have the story be told visually, or was there like a narrative written component to this, or was it just the visuals that drew you in?
It was 110% the visuals. I mean, even to this day, I
Mm.
devote a lot of energy trying to level up my skills. And so I'm constantly in meetings with other comic creators who extol the virtues of writing the script first and then breaking it down to panels. And for me, it's such an alien thing. For me, it's like the visuals are already there. And I just have to maybe break down some of the pages and then, the dialogue and narration just come to fill in what the imagery does not.
Yeah. So growing up at a time when you did, and Puerto Rico's relationship with the U.S. is interesting and difficult sometimes. And I'm curious, you having this desire, this expression to be an artist, did you ever feel like your parents give you any difficulty with that, or were they always supportive of this pursuit?
They were supportive of my talent. They were hesitant of my desire to direct it towards something as trivial as comics. Maybe it's because I left them
Mm,
around in the living room
yeah.
every so often and that would contribute to the mess. and so that was part of it. Maybe because they thought I could spend my money elsewhere, but they were like they would say, "Why don't you go into architecture?" And my answer was too much math, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Right, right. And the reason I
mhm.
ask, oh, sorry to interject. The reason I ask is because of I'm not sure how much of that cultural thing is an immigrant experience, and how much of it is like them, just like being like any parent, wanting to say you should go into something more profitable, or you should do something that is going to benefit the family, or a lot of those things that might be cultural, or might just be a parent looking out for their kid.
Oh, yeah, it's
you
really an
know
interesting thing to try and split where, like, they were definitely willing to, you know, they definitely wanted to foster my skills, as it pertained to, why don't you make the card that everyone's gonna sign for, for the church priest who's leaving to a new parish or something like that. They were willing to have me
Yeah, yeah.
focus on, you on learning how to utilize my talents. But as I grew older, they were always nudging me towards the practicalities of what could I learn, how could I apply it? So ultimately we split the difference to go with like advertising art and design, as it was called at the time. And that happened just at the dawn of the invention of the Macintosh computer, right? So just as I was learning
So this is like 90s, late
late
80s.
80s, so graduate started college around 87, right? So I think the Macintosh came out in 88 maybe. Um, so the teachers still wanted us to do things the old-fashioned way, but myself and a bunch of the students, were really eager to adopt new methods. So we ended up thanks to our student activities, we were able to like finagle having the student government pay for a whole suite of technology that we
Wow.
then used for the school newspaper and for the school yearbook. And then of course for our own homework assignments as well. So it kind of instilled that learn by doing process that I think was something that my parents kind of instilled in us, being, first generation in the US. It was important that everything that was done, if they could do it themselves, they were going to do it themselves. And so I kind of carried that into digital arts.
Yeah, yeah. There's kind of a built-in work ethic to having that kind of background. You're like, okay, we gotta just get our hands dirty and get the work done there. But speaking of the 90s, you mentioned in your bio that the 90s was a very interesting time in independent comics. And I'm curious to know more about that, the comic boom, and what it was like being in that environment at the time and living through that.
Well, so, crazily enough, coming out of art school, and, moving into a more advanced learning, going to the School of Visual Arts right around that time, this was when comics were really determined to prove themselves to be like for adults. It's not just
Mm,
for kids anymore. And so
mm-hmm.
you had, mainstream news covering such things as, The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, or The Watchmen. So for a bunch of young comic artists, there was just a determination to break in somehow. If we couldn't get into Marvel or DC, there were so many small independent publishers just popping up at the time to make a name for themselves in some way. And so I ended up, connecting with a small indie publisher. They were called Double Edge Publishing, and they kind of focused on very 50s esque sci-fi, so almost like Pulp Fiction before Pulp Fiction really really came back. But so it had this very pulpy feel. There were black and white comics, and it was like, you know, time travel and dinosaur people, and you know, and then the
The good stuff.
occasional yeah, and the occasional like mystical martial artist type in the mix, and
Yeah.
fun stuff, but the environment was changing so quickly at the time, right? You had the 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 boom of Image Comics hitting, impacting, right? And then you had the whole boom of the speculator market, Superman dying, holographic covers. It was just nuts. So in that context, there were publishers that were just showing up, one issue, they deliver one issue and then they disappear. And that was happening just all over the
Wow.
place.
Yeah.
And so at that time period, lots of comics were still black and white, new comics were showing up, other familiar comics were disappearing. At the same time, Marvel Comics was kind of showing dominance because this is when, the direct comic shop market was really at its most powerful. And so in that whole mix, I just found that there were other interesting ways to do art. I started doing art, t-shirt art, event art, concert posters. Um, and I started finding a lot of, like people loved the comic book aesthetic, even though they had ostensibly like left comic book behinds. So there was this option to there was this interest for to hire me to do, say, um a new room at a nightclub in New York City, and they're like, "Yeah, make
Wow.
it comic-ish." So, it was a very crazy and fluid time to try and find any means to get my art out there.
But there was work sort of like the main part of it.
Exactly. Just it
Yeah.
was the constant hustle. So,
Yeah.
comics,
Yeah.
as most people know, it takes a long time. It takes weeks to create the art, and then you have to send it to the printers. Takes a month or so for that to happen, and then it comes back. So in the time that I would finish one issue of a comic, I could also design a handful of flyers for nightclubs. I could do a bunch of t-shirt designs, and those things would give me, cash on hand in the moment. And then those opportunities just kept growing until eventually, an entrepreneur was like, "Why don't you partner with me to design a nightclub? And then we'll do something like that." And great opportunities to do artwork at a large scale,
Yeah.
but not necessarily something that you could build a long-term career on. It
Mm.
was it was too fluid. Nightclubs would, even more so than comics, nightclubs would come and go, owners would change around. What was popular at one month would not be the same as another. So, long story short, one really cold winter in New York kind of got me looking at the idea of going west.
Mm.
And from as soon as I started making that decision, the opportunities just opened up. Older brother had moved to California. He's like, "Come out, spend the winter and just check things out." No commitment. As soon as I got there, you know, I was like, "Let me just get a job so I have some play money." And that job turned out, they didn't say it in the ad, but it turned out that they were the publishers of Kung Fu magazine. You know, at the time, I considered myself a young martial artist, so I was so excited at that. Once
Mm.
that door opened up, that I just jumped in with both feet.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I was gonna ask you about your love of kung fu, interest in the martial arts. When does that start in your life? Was that something that you explored when you were younger, or as you said, maybe you found it later in life?
I did explore it when I was younger. I mean, you could say that my older brothers helped me focus on some of those details, for
Mhm.
better or for worse. They wanted me to survive the schoolyard as well. So there was always an interest in, the movies were playing, the those Sunday afternoon kung fu theaters were there. My brothers were so interested in them that as a young kid I would kind of follow along. The typical younger brother tagging along.
Sure.
And then that was enough to have it as a like a secondary interest throughout high school and into college, becoming
Mhm.
the once again I mentioned student activities. So like joining the
Right.
martial arts club was a great way to kind of be active, be involved in the student activities, and also to, impress the girls, right? Like it all was part of the college experience, and
Yeah, yeah.
it was something that I enjoyed to do. It made a nice counterpoint to sitting hunched over a drawing table.
Right, right. So tell me about your time at Kung Fu Magazine and what kind of learning experiences you had there, or what was the environment like in that time period?
It was amazing. So I had moved there. This was mid 90s. They were still like mostly black and white with some color pages, a fairly small publication, but they were connected to like a manufacturing company
Mm.
who was producing like your classic taekwondo white belt, right? So that was where most of their money was coming from. But they were determined to make a go and really push the magazine forward. So at the time, I was more fluent in martial arts than most of the people that were the decision makers. They were a Taiwanese immigrant married to a North Korean immigrant. They were building their company, and this was an opportunity for them to build it, but they still were not too familiar. It was still a steep learning curve. So when I joined in, I had that same learn as I go mentality that made me really valuable to them in terms of quickly learning the printing technology and quickly trying to adopt new methods. And so they gave me a lot of room to experiment um, while we move things forward. And that included allowing me to create a comic strip in the back page of each issue. So that's where I would create this comic. And the comic was part entertainment, part edutainment, right? It was meant to take little, stories and parables within martial arts culture and convey them in a comics form. It turned out to be really popular, and it lasted for about 3 years, 3.5 years, every issue. We had a pretty solid fan base. I ended up include They added more pages to include like a letter column, which kind of turned into a little bit of an advice column. So I would end up taking
Mm.
these questions and asking them to the kung fu masters that I would be working with, because the real day job was for me to be art director. I had to get those photos that would be on the cover of the magazine and in the interior spreads. So I was working with all of these amazing martial artists and trying to capture, what it is about their mastery, what it is about their art that is
Mm.
unique that we could put on a cover. But then as a side effect, I'd capture little bits of like the mythology behind that martial art and the philosophy,
Yeah.
and those things I would squirrel away into like the comic strips.
Mm. This might be just sort of a generic digression here, but I'm curious of how the work that you did interacting with those folks made its way into your writing approach. Like, are there some things that where you felt like maybe there was overlap in the lessons that you were learning in martial arts, perhaps, or from these martial arts experts, to the way you create, I guess I should say.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Like the one thing, and I've talked about this with other martial artists and with martial arts scholars, right? And the going idea is that the martial arts, is ancient, right? But
Mhm.
they are almost a holdover of a time period before the written word, right? A lot of these traditions, a lot of the concepts have always been meant to be transferred, from person to person in a more, like in an oral history kind of way. There are historic texts and some of them are ancient. So it's not uncommon, that martial arts manuals exist, but but that's only one layer of the lessons that are meant to convey. And so the one recurring theme has always within the martial arts has always been that there's another layer to go deeper with. So a beginner martial artist may learn to throw a punch, and okay, so now they've learned how to throw a punch, but then as they advance they may learn that they're not just throwing the punch with their fist, but there's also something going on with their elbow that's hidden, amidst that fight. And if you look really closely at some of the really good kung fu movies, they'll kind of point out these things, right? Where it's not just the fist that you see, but there's something going on with the elbow or with the knee. And so it was that metaphor that just carries on through all of the teaching. And the beautiful thing is that this isn't just about, fighting or martial arts. This concept, permeates every aspect of that cosmology. And so then you think of something like feng shui, which popularly is known as like arranging the furniture in your house, right? That's what most people think of when they hear that term. But then if you peel away a layer and then you think of it in terms of, like, let's say martial artists, right? They want to arrange their house in such a way as to be able to protect what's most important, the emperor or the treasure. And so everything that's arranged in the house, is meant to also serve this other purpose, right? And then now they take that a step further, right? Because martial arts also isn't about protecting oneself in the moment. It's about cultivating longevity, right? What's the point of surviving, being attacked by bandits if you're going to die from an illness, right? So the martial arts wants you to live long and be strong. So then they go back to feng shui. And then, those concepts are also meant to remind you how to live healthy, to have good airflow or to have hygienic living circumstances. And so that's just one example, but so much of that martial philosophy has that has that quality of multiple layers. And once I saw that, I could not stop seeing that. And then that became like a major guiding principle for my art, which is to put another layer behind it and try and add another layer behind that, so that on the surface, someone can look at it and enjoy it. Oh, that's a cool picture of so and so. You know, that's a cool picture of the Prince of Tigers being, given his crown. Let's say
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
quoting a scene from one of my comics, right? But but then not only did I want to do that scene, I want to populate that scene with all of the mythical creatures and all of the animals that are known to live in Asia. So
Mhm.
then that's another layer, because now someone can look at that and start saying, "Oh, look, that's a pangolin. Oh, look, that's a panda." Right? There's another
Yeah,
layer.
yeah.
But then I'll try and go another layer behind that, and I'll compose that work of art to be parallel to, say, um, the coronation of Charlemagne, which is in the 13th chapel of one of the Renaissance uh, cathedrals in Italy. Right? So not related to martial arts at all, not related to Chinese culture, but it's another layer for people who have gone to art history class and have stayed awake. I had a problem staying awake in art history class. But so it's just those layers that I want to keep adding to my art, so that the
Yeah,
next time you
yeah.
come back and look at it, you might see something else.
Right. It's another opportunity to connect the dots and offer more, I guess it's not embellishment, it's just a furthering, right, of the content, for people to have an experience with.
Exactly. Exactly. It's just another hidden layer. It's just I wanna hide reward. It's like Easter eggs. That whole
Yeah,
philosophy of Easter eggs, which is so popular.
right. So, this would be a good time to talk about A Tiger's Tale. And now this is its own project, that is currently on, Kickstarter, correct?
Yeah, so volume 1 and 2 are on Kickstarter currently. We have about 25 days. I
Mhm,
launched the campaign to volume 1 as a way to kick off the whole project in February of 2022,
mhm,
just in time for a year of the tiger.
mm,
And it got a lot of, it was well received. The artwork ended up being featured in a gallery show in 2022. It also received a small arts grant to help with the distribution of that comic. So now with the new year, right? It's a new Chinese New Year. The Lunar New Year of the Rabbit has come. And so I have a volume 2, which is the sequel, right? It's larger, more pages. It's a lot more. Volume 1, I wanted to just create this world for folks to explore. And
mhm.
volume 2, like most good sequels, takes it all, expands on it, and puts it all in parallel, makes it all, increases the stakes,
Yeah.
let's say.
So, just to clarify, A Tiger's Tale began as the comic that you worked on for Kung Fu Magazine, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, when did you feel, or did you feel at the beginning, that this could be something that would be bigger than just the comic strip in the back of the magazine?
I kind of started seeing that and suspecting that when, I would be getting, fan mail, letters from
Mm,
people who are reading it. And some of these were really interesting. I mean, I would get letters sent from from inmates at prisons
Oh,
who had
wow.
an interest in martial arts because it was a violent scenario, but they were also interested in some of the more philosophical ideas that my characters were exploring. Not all conflict has to be resolved violently, that sort of thing. And so it was those little experiences that really started giving me the ideas. And then there was, like I said, that my publishers were willing to let me experiment. So there was one issue where we were covering the Mortal Kombat movies, which were coming out at the time.
Yeah.
And so it was very much the issue was devoted to martial arts in the movies. And so they actually let me publish a multi-page story within those pages. It turned out to be about 10 or 12 pages with like the full color center spread as like the
Mm,
pull-out poster.
yeah.
They wanted to
Yeah.
make a big deal of it. And so that's when I decided, okay, rather than just doing these simple little, the secret origin of monkey kung fu, let me try and tell a genuine story. Let me try and make these characters evolve in a
Uh-huh.
real story sort of way,
Right.
rather than just being McGruff the crime dog, right? Who they just show up, they offer their lesson and they disappear.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the foundation of what would eventually become the graphic novel.
Mm,
That's the story was popular, it was a small framework. And then when the magazine was no longer able to continue printing it in its pages, right? This was now at the start of the internet. The internet was
mm,
invented.
yeah.
So we all had lofty ideas of converting a tiger's tail into an online cartoon,
Mm,
not really knowing exactly what that would entail,
right.
you know.
And that's a big leap, right? Because for somebody who's always been in print, in essence, how did you feel that you made that leap personally? Do you feel like being in a digital world now takes away from the experience, or is there something being lost here, especially when it comes to the medium that you work in?
That's a tricky thing. I love the smell of a freshly printed comic. There's still such an experiential quality to reading it in print that I was reticent to give that up. But also, the opportunity to explore with a new form of art, in this case, animation online, I was willing to try it, not really realizing how much time it would take. And it would it would probably take about 10 years of the project being caught in that kind of developmental limbo where the technology was not quite there, the investment was not fully committed. It just languished for a while. But meanwhile, the internet was evolving. Kung Fu Magazine as a cultural entity or as an IP was growing. It was entering more of the mainstream. So the demands of the day job were as such where I had to focus on the day job. And then the writing and drawing of A Tiger's Tale as a comic or graphic novel kind of became relegated to nights and weekends. So that slowed down the process, but it also gave me opportunities to really distill what I wanted to say
Hmm.
with it, what kind of art I wanted to do
Yeah. Isn't that
on it.
something that happens a lot in writing too, especially for me in particular. I'm currently working full time in this other thing, but then it seems like I have all week to process. And then by the time I actually have maybe 30, 45 minutes, I know exactly what needs to happen. I think that's kind of what you're talking about, right? But just with a visual kind of medium.
Mhm.
Oh, I lost you. Oh, okay. But no, it's exciting because I think that over time you just find a way to manage your craft even though there's restraints. Is that correct?
It's true, it's true, and, I admit that I took some detours. I've still had a love for, like, art that is, experiential, I like to call it. So, like, interactive art installations
Mm,
and, designing of events. So, there were definitely time periods over the course of the years where I would focus my energy on such things as, this summer we're going to go to Burning Man or, for New Year's Eve, we're gonna host this interactive art installation. You know, so there were always other ways that I was trying to pursue artistic expression, knowing that sometimes, drawing, creating comics is a long and lonely process. So, I wanted to also socialize and have a bit of a social life. So the chance to do that in these other venues, were always there.
Right. So you also mentioned that you have a bit of experience working in, excuse me, children's book illustrations.
Yes. Yes.
Can you? Yeah.
In, in 2012, once again, thanks to the Kung Fu connection, right?
Mm.
Um, Screenwriter John Fusco contacted the magazine
Mm.
asking if we knew any artists. Now, John Fusco, screenwriter, is the screenwriter of movies like Crossroads, Young Guns 1 and 2, Hidalgo. Like his two great loves are horses and martial arts. And so for the martial artists, we'll recognize him for the Netflix series Marco Polo, which he traveled to Mongolia to executive produce. But then he also wrote the screenplay to a movie called Forbidden Kingdom, which is the first and only movie where Jackie Chan actually fights Jet Li on screen.
Oh, right, right.
So
Yeah.
for the martial art geeks, it's a kind of a seminal moment. Those two titans in one movie.
Yeah.
But so his abiding love for martial arts put Kung Fu Magazine on the top of the list when he was on the lookout for a children's book illustrator. And
Mm.
so my publisher at the time just sees the email and looks over to me and says, "Do you want to do a comic? Do you want to do a children's book?" And to which I had to say yes. I was an admirer of John Fusco's work and movies. How could I not at least take a look at his manuscript? And so it's another kung fu story. It's about the origins of praying mantis kung fu. And so it's a story of a young monk who is bullied, and he ends up leaving the temple and wandering the forest, and he discovers a praying mantis and sees the praying mantis fending off the attacks of a larger beetle, and
Mm.
that inspires him to observe the praying mantis and develop praying mantis kung fu, and then come back to the temple victorious, having invented a new martial art.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I'll have to reach seek out for that publication for my kid. He's just getting of age where that might be interesting for sure. But can you tell me a bit of the collaboration there, going to a completely different medium? What kind of concessions had to be made or things that you weren't expecting that you discovered in that medium?
As a designer and a comic book artist, I'm usually very accustomed to having complete control. Well, so I'm sorry, I think we lost you, but I'll
Oh,
just
oh,
keep going. I
okay.
think I know what your question is.
Yeah.
Um, so as a designer and as a comic book artist, I'm fairly obsessed with controlling every aspect of the page. Working for the magazine, I've been in charge of everything from the actual footnotes and making sure that number 42 appears on page number 42 for that page. And so, working with Tuttle Publishing, the publisher for this book, they specialize in all sorts of martial arts publications. So, they were interested in publishing this children's book because of its martial arts themes, but they were not, that we'll say, they were not as experienced in the specifics of publishing a children's book. At the same time, I was not as experienced with those things. So I had some ideas of how to create the art and how the art would interact with the text. It's a very common thing to think about when you're creating a comic book, but within a picture book, there are other people involved. There's an actual other designer who's designing the book. There's editorial working on the copy. And so there was only so much I could do.
Mm.
Added to that, it took them a little bit of time to determine the actual size of the art that they wanted. So I had
Mm.
generated a few pieces of artwork just to show them this is the style I wanted to work in.
Mm-hmm.
But then, the year and a half of time that they had initially given me to work on the art turned into about 5 or 6 months over the course of them deciding the exact size of the book, which for me, I was very fixated on because I had specific ideas of how each page should look. And in retrospect, I could have probably designed the artwork to not rely so much on those details. And then that would have allowed the book to flow a little more, the production process to flow a little more smoothly, But because I had these very specific ideas of creating these like panoramic paintings that would move almost like a Disney background. It'd be these ornate panoramic watercolor paintings that you could read from left to right, and they would tell part of the story. But the artwork looks beautiful. I think the story is beautiful. But when the two combined, there's just you'd have to read it to see like the text doesn't always match with the art.
Uh,
Sometimes
okay.
they drop the text window because there was too much text for that art, so they needed to
Mm,
create a square which covers up some of the art. It
yeah.
was an imperfect product, but it still gained some recognition,
Yeah.
which is what mattered, and it opened so many doors. Like 10 years later, like that book is still such a seminal part of where my artistic path led me.
That's amazing. So you continue to do more children's books and those kinds of illustrations after that quite a bit?
Not as much. I mean, working on that project really reignited my fire to focus on A Tiger's Tale. So I ended up redoubling my efforts there. I did end up doing a couple of other illustrations for chapter books and a few other publications, but they were my real passion from that moment forward was to really finally finish A Tiger's Tale.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's incredible. So I want to, well, first of all, I want to thank you for this conversation. It's been phenomenal. I have just a couple more questions to be mindful of your time here. I'm curious what you're consuming right now, whether it's, as you mentioned, art exhibits or books or other works of art that are lighting you up right now, that are really empowering you to get back to your creative office to get started.
Well, I've really been having a great time exploring Kickstarter as an environment for
Mm,
comics, and like kind of cutting loose from the classic Marvel and DC output. You know,
hmm
I still like my X-Men, so I'm still picking up the Immortal X-Men, which still comes out recently. And I'm picking up the latest run of Detective Comics because Ram V's Batman is so operatic right now. So, but those are not as they don't prob they don't figure as prominently in my reading as compared to a lot of the Kickstarter campaigns that are showing up, and a lot of the individual artists who are just having their own voice. There was a recent Kickstarter of the Monkey King last year, which was great because it was the story of the Monkey King, classic kung fu tale, but it was framed within the subways of New York City's Chinatown.
Oh, wow.
Brilliant, brilliant.
How great. So you don't
Jerry,
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Jerry Marr was the creator for that, and it's just such a great little spin on a classic tale.
Yeah. So it seems like you've definitely seen a change in approach for folks because they feel empowered to be truthful to their own perspective because they're not beholden to the corporate aspects of the industry, right? I mean, as with anything.
Oh, 100%. Also, if you consider like this little new shift in how comics are being published, could be counted as one of the few silver linings of the 2020 pandemic, where, you know, we were all locked in, we all had a lot less to do. So a lot more people rediscovered their love of comics, and at the same time, a platform like Kickstarter, and there are others, right? Indiegogo, Zoop, etc., made it much more effective for the individual artist to find their audience and and match their production to it. So it's not like you have to invest thousands of dollars to print out thousands of comic books and then try and sell them at a convention. Right now you could go to a place like Kickstarter, find out that you've got a passionate 100 members of your audience, and so you can now find a digital publish printing place that will print you 100 copies for them, and then maybe an extra 100 that you can keep to take to the convention. But you're
Yeah.
not filling up your garage with thousands and thousands of boxes either, So it
Right.
just is a little more manageable on a smaller scale, which I think is a benefit to many.
Right. So this is a very selfish question, but if somebody is in the process of starting to read comics or doesn't know where to begin, because as you said, there's just countless and countless issues and publications and places to go, where would one begin if they're looking to get into this medium of comics?
Well, I mean, they're still out there, so I would always try and find a local comic shop, a reputable one, right? And usually their part of their mission is to really try and play matchmaker for the reader and for
Mm,
the comic. But also the local libraries now have really recognized that comics are a thing and comics are an epic gateway for reading. And so librarians have taken comics and graphic novels very seriously over the past 5 or so years. So those are the two first resources. And then, it's you can ask me, right? I've definitely read so many that I've kind of have a knack, if I do say
mhm.
so myself, I have a knack with being able to figure out what I would recommend to a person after having a conversation with them. It's
Right,
kind of a
right.
fun game to be like, oh, so you like action movies? Have you checked out The Invisibles? Oh, you like crazy, detailed history? Well, maybe you should maybe read Age of Bronze and see the comic book version of the War of Troy, or you could
Mhm.
read Berlin and just find like an on the ground history of Germany between World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
There's so many possibilities out there.
So many places to begin. It's such a an endless possibility there. So, lastly, I'm curious because this is the last time I'll get to ask this because this is like almost the last day of January. I'm interested to know what things you're working on this year to improve your craft, to better your work. If there are some things that you're looking to overcome this year for your craft,
Well, I
as a
think
resolution, I should say.
yeah. Well, okay, but the one thing that I've really realized is how important community is within the creative process. I mean, I think I've kind of always known it in the sense of a lot of the experiential art I've worked on has been collaborative. So I've always known that there's a community component to it. But within the context of comics, it's so important to find your peers and to try and work with them. So I've joined a few online organizations that I'm really glad to have found, right? One is called Kids Comics Unite, and they're a group of artists, writers, librarians, agents who are just devoted to elevating the craft. There's another group called Comics Connection, which want to have more practical information available for creatives in terms of protecting their intellectual property, in terms of knowing when to sign a contract and when not to sign a contract. So groups like that, I think, have been incredibly valuable to me because they've gotten me out of the whole concept of I just want to be an artist and I want someone else to take care of all the details. And they've really helped me realize that it's all part of the process, that actually packing and shipping my books to backers, can be an artistic process. I can make each one of those packages a little bit of a work of art.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean I have to cut the cardboard and make an origami package, which is some of what I did for my first campaign, which regrettably took more time than I anticipated. But it's just that the importance of knowing where I can put my energy so that I
Hmm.
can, meet my goals. And, I'm really good at starting projects and I'm finally getting okay at finishing them. So with the campaign for volume 2 of A Tiger's Tale, now entering its first week, I've got, 25 more days to really focus on, you know, getting the word out there and inviting people into the dialogue that is the Kickstarter campaign. Because it's been fun. Like, I don't just want to go out there and say, "Hey, buy my book." I want people to experience some of the ideas and some of the conversations that inform the Tiger's Tale. So I've been reaching out to as many of the kung fu masters that I still know and inviting them onto live streams so that we can talk comic and kung fu from a really informed perspective and then share those conversations to anyone who wants to listen. Regardless of whether or not they want to back the campaign, they could still check out the live stream and get a firsthand view of what we mean when we talk about having good kung fu and brewing a pot of tea, or having good kung fu and how one plays a flute. So it's like these other aspects, right? Everyone thinks of kung fu as the fight scene, but there's so much more to it. And so it's been like the Kickstarter campaign will help finance the publication of volume 2, the comic book, but the Kickstarter campaign will also, be a chance for me and my martial arts friends to talk to anyone who wants to talk to us and really break down, some of these lesser known concepts of kung fu and Asian philosophy and comics and movies too. I'm a big fan of movies, and one of the things I didn't even mention is that Kung Fu Magazine, like I'm the official Marvel Cinematic Universe movie reviewer for Kung Fu
Oh,
Magazine, right?
nice.
So I get to go to these movies and really just focus on the fight scenes between Captain
Mm.
America and Black Panther or whatever. And then I get to interview some of the martial artists who are involved in the stunt work
Oh,
or,
lovely.
the choreography. But then I get to also, bring my, love for comics and really go into the minutia of what went on behind the scenes, or what's the real origins of Black Panther or
Right.
Ant-Man or Kang the Conqueror. I'm going to see Ant-Man next week
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
very excited about that.
Oh, it's coming out so soon. Wow, I thought it was
Well,
a few months.
it's not actually
Oh, it's
coming out
the
so soon,
special.
but I
Yeah.
got invited to a preview screening,
Very
which is,
nice.
the best way to watch them. There's no better way to get a good opinion about a movie than reserved seating with only a select other, highbrow reviewers.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think this has been a phenomenal time, and this is a wonderful note to end on. But Patrick, I want to thank you so much for your time, but also for reminding us of the power of comic books. I think it is such a beautiful gateway for people to get engaged and to find their way in the world. And of course, alongside your love for martial arts, I think it's a beautiful way to strengthen ourselves and lead a beautiful, powerful life and community. I mean, what better way to say it than the way that you just encapsulated that? I mean, it's incredible. So thanks for all that you gave me today. This has been such a gift, and I hope that we get to, talk a little bit more down the road. But I really can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate this. And the invitation is 100% open for you to join us on our live streams, either in person or in the chat, and ask any questions you can come up with. My goal is to stump some of these kung fu masters, and they're so knowledgeable. I mean, not
Yeah,
just of martial arts, but some of them know some crazy knowledge about
that's right.
movies and comics as well. So we
Yeah,
want
yeah.
people to come by and jump in on that conversation and really like elevate
Oh,
it for everyone. Like a
yeah,
good
yeah.
conversation is fun for everyone involved. So
That's right. Well, yeah, I'd love to include that in the episode description so that we get all of your stuff in there and folks know where to find you and where those streams are at. So I can't wait to check them out as well. It's going to be a good time.
excellent. Yeah, it'll be fun. We've had a few that have been mind blowing, and there are more to
Yeah,
come. So as you can tell,
wonderful.
I'm just bubbling with enthusiasm for them.
No,
This
that's
isn't
right.
an act. I'm really excited about them.
No, that's the way to be. But thank you so much, Patrick. You've been amazing, and I hope we get to chat a little bit later down the road. Okay.
I hope so too. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, man. Well, you have a wonderful Sunday, and I'll be in touch on the internet.
Excellent. Once again, I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk. So you take care. Let's talk again soon.
That's right. You too. Take care. Bye.
Okay, bye.